Commander Vex Tarragon of the 7th Centauri Fleet huffed in annoyance as another alarm blared through the command deck. The piercing sound made his secondary auditory membranes throb. Would somebody please shut that cursed thing off? He barked, 4 of his 6 eyes squinting at the holographic battle map hovering before him. Sorry, Commander. Lieutenant Plex scrambled across the deck, her tentacles frantically working 3 different control panels at once. The proximity sensors are malfunctioning again. 3rd time this rotation. Vex sighed dramatically, his crest deflating slightly with the exhaled breath. Spectacular. Just what we needed during the largest Confederacy offensive in 50 cycles. He turned to face his communications officer. Remind me again why the most advanced battlecruiser in the Centauri Armada has equipment that works about as well as a Grolian waste processor. Officer Nix suppressed a chuckle, her bioluminescent patches flickering briefly with amusement. Budget cuts, sir. The High Command redirected funds to that new recreation station orbiting Centauri Prime. Ah, yes. Because nothing says we're serious about winning this war like a zero-gravity spa experience, Vex replied, rolling all 6 eyes in perfect synchronization. A feat he'd practiced extensively at the Academy, much to his instructor's dismay. Through the massive viewport of the ZSS Inevitable Victory, the darkness of space stretched endlessly, punctuated by distant stars and the occasional flash of weapons fire. The battle had been raging for nearly 30 hours now, standard galactic time, of course. The Centauri Confederacy's forces clashed with the Drakari Dominion's fleet over control of the Nexus Gate, an ancient transportation hub that could shorten supply routes by weeks. Vex's exoskeleton clicked softly as he shifted his weight, mandibles working nervously. Despite his sarcastic exterior, he knew the stakes. The Drakari outnumbered them nearly 2-1. Their only advantage was superior positioning and the tactical genius of Admiral Zorn, who commanded the operation from the flagship. Commander Officer Nix suddenly called out, her voice rising with alarm. We're receiving an emergency transmission from Admiral Zorn. Before Vex could respond, the holographic battle map flickered and transformed into the stern face of Admiral Zorn. His typically immaculate silver scales appeared dull with exhaustion, 4-fingered hands clasped tightly behind his back. Commander Tarragon, the Admiral began, his voice unusually tense. Our long-range scanners have detected an anomaly approaching the battlefield. Unknown configuration, unknown propulsion signature. Vex felt his hearts quicken. Pirates? Mercenaries. Admiral Zorn's expression darkened further. Worse, Commander. According to preliminary data, it appears to be of human origin. The command deck fell silent. Even the incessant alarm seemed to quiet in respect of this revelation. Humans, Vex finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. But they've never ventured beyond their home system. They're barely warp-capable. Evidently, Admiral Zorn replied dryly. That assessment requires revision. The galactic conflict background. As Admiral Zorn's transmission ended, Vex found himself staring at the empty space where the hologram had been. Humans. Of all the species in the galaxy, those bizarre, soft-skinned bipeds were the last he expected to encounter here. Everyone, battle stations, Vex ordered, his professional demeanor temporarily overriding his usual sardonic tone. And someone brief me on everything we know about humans, now. Officer Nix's tentacles danced across her console. Accessing xenobiology archives, sir. Though I should note most of our data comes from that diplomatic exchange 8 cycles ago. Not exactly comprehensive. Well, that's just perfect, Vex muttered. We're potentially facing a species we know less about than what I had for breakfast. The massive engines of the Inevitable Victory hummed as the battlecruiser adjusted its position in the fleet formation. Through the viewport, Vex could see dozens of Centauri vessels maneuvering in perfect harmony, a testament to centuries of space warfare experience. The conflict with the Drakari Dominion had been brewing for generations. What began as minor territorial disputes over uninhabited systems had escalated into full-scale war about 40 cycles ago when rich deposits of quantium, the rare element essential for faster-than-light travel, were discovered in the contested regions. Lieutenant Plex approached with a data tablet. Sir, historical context for our current predicament, as requested. Ah, yes. Because what I really need right now is a history lesson, Vex replied, nevertheless taking the tablet. But please, enlighten me while we wait for our possible doom. The Nexus Gate we're currently fighting over was constructed by the precursors approximately 12,000 cycles ago. Plex began, ignoring her commander's sarcasm with practiced ease. When activated, it can create stable wormholes to 16 different locations across 4 galactic quadrants, including Sol System Officer Nix interjected, looking up from her console. Earth, the human homeworld. X's crest stiffened in surprise. They're connected to this network. But they're pre-council. They don't even have representation in galactic politics. The connection was dormant, Plex explained. According to records, the Drakari attempted to activate the Sol terminus about 10 cycles ago, hoping to outflank our defenses. Which explains how humans might have learned about interstellar politics, Vex concluded, the pieces falling into place. The Drakari wouldn't hesitate to recruit primitive species as cannon fodder. The tactical officer, Captain Rel, a stocky Zentari with battle-scarred mandibles, joined the conversation. The Drakari lost 6 scout ships in that expedition. Their official report claimed technical malfunctions, but rumors suggested otherwise. You're telling me humans destroyed 6 advanced Drakari vessels? Vex asked incredulously. With what? Pointed sticks. Unknown, Sir Rel replied. But the Drakari immediately classified all information about Earth. Then they doubled the defensive grid around their side of the Nexus Gate. Vex moved back to the battle map, his mind racing. The conflict had already cost millions of lives on both sides. Both the Zentari Confederacy and the Drakari Dominion had exhausted their economies in pursuit of victory. Neither could afford to back down now. So the question becomes, Vex said, his voice uncharacteristically thoughtful, are these humans arriving as Drakari allies? Or have they come with their own agenda? The answer came sooner than expected. The ship's sensors wailed again, but this time, it wasn't a malfunction. Commander Lieutenant Plex shouted. Spatial distortion detected. Something's coming through. First sighting of the human warship. The command deck of the Inevitable Victory fell into hushed silence as the spatial distortion grew, warping the very fabric of space before them. It started as a pinprick of intense light, then expanded outward like a blooming flower made of lightning and quantum impossibilities. Magnify viewscreen, Vex ordered, all traces of his usual sarcasm temporarily abandoned. This was history unfolding before his 6 eyes, and even his cynical soul recognized the gravity of the moment. The distortion reached its crescendo, a swirling vortex of energy that seemed to tear reality itself. Then, with a final flash that momentarily blinded the ship's sensors, something emerged. Aided by the 7 moons of Zentari, Prime Officer Nix whispered, her bioluminescent patches flaring with shock. The vessel that appeared was unlike anything in the known galaxy. Where Zentari ships were elegant and streamlined, reminiscent of the aquatic predators that once dominated their homeworld, and Drakari vessels favored crystalline geometrical precision, this was something else entirely. Are those exposed engine components? Lieutenant Plex asked, her voice a mixture of horror and fascination. And is that actual physical armor plating? The human warship hung in space, a brutal testament to function over form. It resembled nothing so much as a hammer blunt at one end, with a massive rectangular section that must have contained its main systems, then tapering to a narrower handle, where enormous engines glowed with barely contained power. Its hull was a patchwork of metals in various dark shades, giving it a cobbled-together appearance that somehow made it even more intimidating. Scan that monstrosity, Vex commanded, having regained his composure. And somebody get me fleet command. I want to know if anyone's received any communication from, whatever that is. Captain Rel worked his station frantically. Scans are having difficulty penetrating their hull, sir. Some kind of interference technology. But what we can tell is concerning. Enlighten me, Vex said dryly. Because my day hasn't been stressful enough. Their power signature is off the charts, sir. Energy output exceeding anything in our database. And they appear to have weapon systems active, but of unknown configuration. Vex's mandibles clicked nervously. Size comparison. Approximately 2/3 the length of our battlecruiser, Rel reported. But their mass readings suggest much denser construction. They're built like a fortress, sir. A compact, hyper-powered Fortress Vex mused. How charming. The tactical display suddenly updated, showing both Zentari and Drakari fleets adjusting positions. Both sides were clearly as surprised by this new arrival as Vex was. Sir, Officer Nix called out. We're receiving a communication request. From the human vessel. Vex straightened his uniform, his crest automatically flaring to its most impressive height, an instinctive response to potential confrontation. On screen. Let's meet our unexpected guests. The holographic display flickered to life. And for the first time, Vex found himself face to face with a human. The creature staring back at him had disturbingly few eyes, just two. Set in a flat face with a bizarre protrusion in the center that apparently served as an olfactory organ. Its skin was an alarming pinkish color, and instead of a proper exoskeleton, it appeared to be covered in some kind of synthetic material. This is Captain Eleanor Reeves of the United Earth Defense Force vessel Justicar, the human announced in surprisingly perfect galactic standard. We come to observe the conflict over the Nexus Gate. Both belligerent parties are hereby advised to maintain a minimum safe distance of 50,000 kilometers from our vessel. Any approach closer than this perimeter will be considered a hostile action. A stunned silence fell over the command deck. The sheer audacity. They're threatening both our fleet and the Drakari. Lieutenant Plex finally sputtered. A single vessel against two of the most powerful armadas in the galaxy. Vex found himself shocked into rare sincerity. Either they're completely insane, or they know something we don't. The human captain, this Eleanor Reeves, continued with the same disconcerting calm. We will transmit our observation parameters shortly. Justicar out. The communication ended abruptly, leaving Vex staring at empty space once again. Sir, Captain Rel said urgently, the Drakari are moving. 3 heavy cruisers breaking formation, on intercept course with the human vessel. Vex's mandibles spread in a grim smile. Well. It seems our scaly friends are about to test the human's ultimatum. He settled back into his command chair, crossing his upper limbs. This should be educational, for someone at least. On the view screen, the ungainly human ship hung motionless against the backdrop of stars, seeming almost passive as the sleek Drakari warships approached. Almost. Alien reactions and initial confrontation. Commander Tarragon, Admiral Zorn's voice cut through the tension on the bridge as his hologram materialized once again. Report on that human vessel. What in blazes do they think they're doing? Vex turned to face his superior, noting the unusually frazzled appearance of the normally composed admiral. Apparently, sir, they're doing whatever they want. They've established a no-approach perimeter and seem fully prepared to enforce it against both our forces and the Drakari. Preposterous. Admiral Zorn's scales flushed a deep crimson, a rare display of emotion for a Zentari of his rank. 1 ship? Against 2 battle fleets? It must be a bluff. Possibly, Vex conceded. Or perhaps not. The Drakari seem eager to find out. 3 of their heavy cruisers are moving to intercept. As if on cue, the tactical display updated, showing the approaching Drakari vessels, sleek, crystalline ships that gleamed even in the darkness of space. Their formation was aggressive but cautious, spreading out to approach the Justicar from 3 directions simultaneously. All ships, maintain position, Admiral Zorn ordered. Let's see what happens. If the humans have some hidden capability, I'd rather the Drakari discover it at their expense. How considerate of you. Admiral Vex muttered under his breath. Across the command deck, the crew of the Inevitable Victory watched with a mixture of professional interest and undisguised curiosity as the drama unfolded before them. The Drakari cruisers continued their approach, now just 70,000 kilometers from the human vessel and closing rapidly. Sir, Captain Rel reported, we're intercepting Drakari communications. They're demanding the human ship power down weapons and prepare to be boarded. Bold, Vex commented. Stupid but bold. Officer Nix suddenly straightened at her station. Commander. The human vessel is broadcasting on all frequencies. They're repeating their warning. Through the ship's communication system came the calm, measured voice of Captain Reeves. Drakari vessels approaching the Justicar. This is your final warning. Maintain minimum safe distance of 50,000 kilometers. You have 30 seconds to comply. 30 seconds, Lieutenant Plex exclaimed. What happens in 30 seconds? Vex leaned forward in his command chair, all four of his primary arms gripping the armrests. I believe we're about to find out. On the tactical display, the Drakari ships continued their approach, now accelerating. Clearly, they interpreted the human warning as a sign of weakness, a bluff to be called. 15 seconds, Officer Nix counted down quietly. Weapon status on the human vessel, Vex asked. Still can't get clear readings, Sir Captain Rel replied. But energy buildup detected in multiple locations along their hull. 5 seconds, Officer Nix announced. The Drakari vessels were now 55,000 kilometers from the Justicar, and showing no signs of slowing. Time's up, Vex said softly. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The human ship remained motionless as the Drakari cruisers closed in. Then, with a suddenness that left the Zentari observers blinking in surprise, pinpricks of light flashed across the Justicar's hull. Energy spike, Captain Rel shouted, his professional demeanor cracking. Massive weapons discharge. What followed defied explanation. The space between the Justicar and the lead Drakari cruiser seemed to warp, as though reality itself was being bent. A barely visible distortion like heat waves rising from desert sand shot from the human vessel toward its target. When it reached the Drakari ship, there was no explosion, no dramatic fireball. The cruiser simply came apart. Not as though it had been destroyed, but as if someone had removed the connections between its component parts. One moment it was a functioning warship, the next, it was a cloud of perfectly intact components floating away from each other in the vacuum of space. What in the name of all that's sacred? Admiral Zorn whispered, his holographic eyes wide with shock. The remaining 2 Drakari cruisers immediately broke off their approach, executing emergency maneuvers that sent them veering away from the human vessel. Too late. 2 more distortion waves reached out, and with the same terrifying precision, disassembled both ships piece by piece, leaving their crews floating helplessly amid the separated components of their vessels. No casualties detected, Lieutenant Plex reported, her voice trembling. The Drakari life support pods are intact. They've all been spared. Vex found himself momentarily speechless, a rare occurrence indeed. When he finally spoke, even he could hear the tremor in his voice. Well, he said, I believe that answers our question about whether they were bluffing. The human warship reveals its capabilities. The aftermath of the human ship's attack left both fleets in a state of stunned silence. Across all communication channels, not a word was spoken as commanders on both sides processed what they had just witnessed. The Justicar hung in space, that blunt, inelegant hammer of a vessel, having just shattered every preconception about human technological capabilities. Status of the Drakari crew, Vex finally asked, breaking the spell that had fallen over his command deck. Lieutenant Plex consulted her displays. Alive, sir. All of them. The life support systems in their escape pods and individual survival suits are functioning at optimal levels. In fact, she paused, double-checking her readings. It appears the human weapon specifically targeted non-essential ship systems first, giving the crew time to reach safety before disabling the main hull. How thoughtful of them, Vex remarked, his sarcasm now tinged with genuine astonishment. They take apart 3 warships like a child dismantling toys, but make sure no one gets hurt in the process. Commander Officer Nix interjected, we're receiving a priority transmission from the human vessel. They're broadcasting to both fleets simultaneously. Vex exchanged glances with Admiral Zorn's hologram. The Admiral gave a curt nod. Put it through, Vex ordered. The main view screen flickered, and once again the flat-faced human captain appeared. Captain Eleanor Reeves sat in what must have been her command chair, though the bridge behind her looked absurdly simplistic compared to a Zentari vessel, all flat surfaces and right angles, lacking the elegant bio-integrated controls that advanced civilizations preferred. Zentari Confederacy. Drakari Dominion, Captain Reeves began, her peculiar lipless mouth forming the words with unsettling precision. You have been fighting over the Nexus Gate network for nearly 4 decades. This conflict has cost millions of lives and trillions in resources. It ends today. A ripple of murmurs swept through the command deck. The sheer audacity of the statement left even Vex momentarily speechless. We have observed your civilization since you first attempted to activate the Earth terminus of the Gate network 10 years ago, Reeves continued. We have studied your technologies, your tactics, and your societal structures. We have determined that neither side possesses the necessary perspective to control the Nexus Gate responsibly. Admiral Zorn's hologram stepped forward, his scales now a dangerous shade of deep crimson. This is outrageous. Who are you to make such judgments? You're barely out of your gravity well. Your species wasn't even spacefaring when this conflict began. Captain Reeves turned her gaze directly to the Admiral, those two alien eyes somehow conveying a weight of authority that made even Vex uncomfortable. Correct, Admiral Zorn. And in the brief time since we achieved faster-than-light travel, we've developed technologies that can disassemble your warships without casualties. What does that tell you about our rate of advancement? Before Admiral Zorn could respond, the tactical display erupted with warnings. Captain Rel's mandibles clicked in agitation as he reported, "Sir, the Drakari main fleet is moving. They're bringing their dreadnoughts to bear on the human vessel." 5 massive Drakari capital ships were indeed breaking formation, their crystalline structures gleaming menacingly as they oriented toward the lone human warship. Each dreadnought was nearly twice the size of the inevitable Victory, bristling with weapon emplacements and protected by the most advanced shields in known space. Predictable, Captain Reeves said with what seemed like genuine disappointment. We had hoped for restraint. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, when reviewing the sensor logs, the Zentari analysts would have to slow the recording to 1/10 speed to fully comprehend it. The Justicar's hull shimmered slightly, as though seen through heat distortion. Then, where there had been one human vessel, there were suddenly 5 identical ships, perfectly positioned to counter each approaching Drakari dreadnought. Quantum duplication, gasped Lieutenant Plex. That's theoretically impossible. Evidently not for humans, Vex replied dryly. Each copy of the Justicar emitted the same pinpricks of light seen during the first engagement. This time, however, the distortion waves that followed were focused differently. Instead of disassembling the Drakari vessels, they simply enveloped them in translucent fields of energy. Within these fields, the mighty dreadnoughts were suddenly, completely immobilized. No energy readings from the Drakari vessels, Captain Rel reported, his voice hushed with awe. It's as if they've been. Paused. Temporal stasis fields, Officer Nix whispered. They've mastered localized time manipulation. Captain Reeves's voice came through the communication system again, calm as ever despite having just demonstrated technology that the most advanced races in the galaxy had only theorized about. We don't wish to cause harm, she stated. The crews of those vessels are unharmed. They are simply experiencing time at a rate of approximately 1 second per 1,000 years. When we deactivate the fields, they will perceive nothing more than a brief flash of light. Vex leaned back in his command chair, a strange laughter bubbling up from deep within him. Well, Admiral, he said to Zorn's stunned hologram, I believe negotiations may be in order. Admiral Zorn could only nod mutely. The 5 duplicate Justicars simultaneously collapsed back into a single vessel, the process as smooth and natural as water droplets merging. Now, Captain Reeves said, her tone shifting to something that might almost be called friendly, shall we discuss the future of the Nexus Gate network? We have some proposals we believe will benefit all parties involved. Major battle sequence. The fragile moment of potential diplomacy shattered as abruptly as the Drakari cruisers. Commander Tarragon, Officer Nix shouted, her bioluminescent patches flashing urgent patterns. Multiple hyperspace signatures detected. Drakari reinforcements. Vex's crest stiffened in alarm. How many vessels? 17 warships, sir. Including the Inevitable Dominion. A collective hush fell over the command deck. The Inevitable Dominion, flagship of the Drakari Armada and personal vessel of Grand Admiral TX Rastaban, the most decorated and feared Drakari commander in history. Wonderful timing, Vex muttered. Just when negotiations seemed possible. On the tactical display, a new fleet of Drakari vessels materialized from hyperspace behind their frozen dreadnoughts. These ships were different, darker, more angular designs with ominous red energy signatures pulsing along their hulls. Black Guard vessels, Admiral Zorn's hologram said grimly. Rastaban's personal squadron. The most fanatical soldiers in Drakari space. The human captain, Reeves, was still on the communication channel. Her expression remained remarkably unchanged despite the arrival of significant enemy reinforcements. Captain Reeves Vex said, leaning forward in his command chair, "I strongly suggest you withdraw." Grand Admiral Rastaban is not known for his diplomatic temperament. A curious expression, something like a slight upturn of her mouth corners, passed across the human's face. "Thank you for your concern, Commander Tarragon. But we anticipated this development." Before Vex could respond, a new communication override took control of all channels. The face that appeared on the view screen was distinctly Drakari-scaled, with vertical pupils and crimson eyes, and a prominent ridge of horns crowning a severe brow. Grand Admiral Rastaban had arrived. Pathetic human vessel Rastaban began without preamble, his voice a rasping hiss that seemed to scrape against Vex's auditory membranes. "Your parlor tricks with our scout ships are impressive, but the game ends now. You will surrender your temporal technology, or I will reduce your primitive craft to its component atoms." Captain Reeves appeared entirely unruffled by the threat. "Grand Admiral Rastaban, your reputation precedes you. Unfortunately, I cannot comply with your demand." "Then you will be destroyed," Rastaban snarled. "All vessels, target the human ship. Full weapons barrage." The 17 Drakari warships moved with coordinated precision, their formation spreading to surround the Justicar. Energy readings spiked across the tactical display as weapons systems powered up simultaneously. "By the Seven Moons," Lieutenant Plex whispered. "They're going to vaporize that ship." Vex found himself gripping his armrests tighter. Despite the human vessel's impressive technology, no single ship could withstand concentrated fire from 17 advanced warships. Even with their unusual defensive capabilities, this would be. His thoughts were interrupted by Officer Nix's startled cry. Spatial distortions detected. Multiple signatures, similar to the human vessel's arrival. The void of space around the battlefield rippled and tore as 5, 10, 20 new spatial anomalies bloomed like deadly flowers. From each emerged a human vessel different from the Justicar, but unmistakably of the same origin. Blocky, functional, brutally efficient in design. 23 human warships, Captain Rel announced, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. They've surrounded both fleets. The human reinforcements had indeed positioned themselves in a three-dimensional sphere around the entire battlefield, enclosing both Centauri and Drakari forces. A new human face appeared on the communication channel, older than Captain Reeves, with silver-white hair cut short against a weathered brown scalp. "This is Fleet Admiral Thomas Chen of the United Earth Defense Force." The Justicar was not sent alone. It was merely the diplomat. Vex couldn't suppress a bark of laughter. They sent a warship as their diplomat? That explains so much about humans. The Drakari response was immediate and predictable. Grand Admiral Rastaban ordered his ships to redirect fire, splitting their targeting between multiple human vessels. The Blackguard warships opened fire simultaneously, their advanced plasma cannons releasing devastating energy bolts toward the nearest human ships. What happened next defied all conventional understanding of space warfare. The human vessels didn't attempt to evade. Instead, as the Drakari weapons fire approached, the space around each human ship seemed to fold inward. The deadly energy bolts curved around the vessels as though drawn into invisible whirlpools, then emerged behind them, redirected back toward the Drakari fleet. Gravitational lensing, Officer Nix breathed in astonishment. They're bending space itself to redirect energy weapons. 3 Drakari cruisers erupted in flames as their own weapon fire struck them with unerring accuracy. Grand Admiral Rastaban was not deterred. "All ships, physical projectiles. Launch Nova torpedoes." The Drakari fleet responded, launching salvos of the most destructive conventional weapons in their arsenal, quantum-tipped warheads designed to create miniature supernovas on impact. The human fleet's response changed. Rather than redirecting these physical threats, apertures opened on their hulls, releasing swarms of what appeared to be small, autonomous drones. These interceptors moved with impossible speed, intercepting the torpedoes well before they reached their targets. Instead of detonating, however, the torpedoes simply vanished. Each drone seemed to create a tiny pocket of distorted space that swallowed the incoming projectiles whole. Micro-singularities, Lieutenant Plex suggested, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her fear. They're using controlled black holes as defensive weapons. The battle of such a one-sided affair could still be called that continued for several more minutes, with the Drakari forces growing increasingly desperate in their attacks, and the human fleet responding with technologies that seemed more like magic than science. Throughout it all, the Zentari fleet maintained position, not firing a single shot. Admiral Zorn, displaying wisdom that had earned him his rank, recognized the futility of joining a battle against such an overwhelming technological advantage. Finally, with half his fleet disabled or destroyed, Grand Admiral Rastaban's fury gave way to the pragmatism that had kept him alive through countless battles. "Ceasefire," he ordered, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "All vessels, power down weapons." The silence that followed was deafening aftermath and implications. In the tense silence that followed the ceasefire, Vex found himself contemplating how quickly the universe could change. Just hours ago, the greatest concern in his life had been the malfunctioning proximity sensors on his battlecruiser. Now, he was witnessing the dawn of a new galactic order. Fleet Admiral Chen's weathered face remained on the main view screen, his expression stern but not unkind. "Grand Admiral Rastaban, Admiral Zorn. The United Earth Defense Force requests a meeting of representatives from both your governments aboard the Justicar. We have terms to discuss." "Terms?" Rastaban hissed, though his usual venom was noticeably diluted. "You speak as though you've won a war, human. This was merely one battle." Admiral Chen's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "Grand Admiral, with all due respect, what you've witnessed today was not our military at full capacity. It was a demonstration, a fraction of what humanity can bring to bear if necessary." Vex couldn't suppress a chuckle. "I'd hate to see what a full-capacity human response looks like," he muttered to Lieutenant Plex. "You will send representatives," Chen continued, "or we will assume you prefer continued hostilities. I assure you, that would be regrettable for all parties involved." Admiral Zorn's hologram stepped forward. "The Zentari Confederacy agrees to send representatives. I will attend personally with a small delegation." All eyes turned to Rastaban. The Drakari Grand Admiral's scaled face was unreadable, but the slight tremor in his ornate armor betrayed his inner conflict. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "The Dominion will attend. Under protest," noted Admiral Chen replied. "Shuttles will be dispatched to collect your delegations in 1 standard hour. Chen out." As the communication ended, the command deck of the inevitable Victory erupted in a cacophony of voices as the crew tried to process what they had just witnessed. "Commander Officer Nix said," her voice cutting through the chaos, "intelligence updates are flooding in from High Command. Apparently there were human observers in both our territory and Drakari space for years, disguised as merchants, refugees, even maintenance workers. Spies," Vex translated, nodding thoughtfully. "Clever. No one pays attention to the custodial staff. More than that," she continued. "Reports suggest they've been helping, subtly upgrading infrastructure, treating diseases in border colonies, even preventing several natural disasters. So they infiltrated our societies, studied our weaknesses, and all the while were..." "What? Performing charity work?" Vex shook his head in bewilderment. Captain Rel joined the conversation. "Sir, preliminary analysis of their technology suggests they must have made at least 3 fundamental scientific breakthroughs that neither we nor the Drakari have achieved. Their understanding of quantum manipulation, gravity control, and temporal mechanics is, well, frankly, it's terrifying. And yet they didn't simply conquer us," Lieutenant Plex pointed out. "They could have, based on what we've seen today." Vex leaned back in his command chair, staring at the tactical display where the human fleet maintained their perfect formation around both battle groups. "No, they couldn't have," he said finally. Sir Plex looked confused. "They couldn't conquer us," Vex explained, "because that's not what humans do, apparently. They could have destroyed us, yes, but conquest? Domination? That would require a certain mentality, one that, somehow, these terrifying, primitively designed vessels don't seem to possess." As the Zentari delegation prepared to board the shuttle that would take them to the Justicar, Vex couldn't help but wonder what kind of species developed such devastating weapons, yet used them with such restraint. Conclusion: the narrators changed perspective. One standard month after what historians would later call the Nexus intervention, Commander Vex Tarragon stood at the viewport of the inevitable victory, watching as construction drones human, Zentari, and Drakari working in unprecedented cooperation assembled the new Joint Administration Station orbiting the Nexus Gate. Still processing it all, Commander Lieutenant Plex asked, joining him at the viewport. Vex's mandibles clicked in what had become a thoughtful habit. You know, Plex, I've spent my entire career being the most cynical officer in the Zentari fleet. It's a point of pride, really, we've noticed. Sir, she replied with good-natured tolerance. But these humans, he continued, gesturing toward a sleek Earth vessel coordinating the construction efforts, they've made cynicism rather difficult to maintain. The peace treaty had been remarkably straightforward. The Nexus Gate would be administered by a tri-species council. Trade routes would be shared equitably. Technological exchange would begin immediately, though the humans were carefully parceling out their advances to avoid destabilizing either civilization. Did you hear what Captain Reeves said when Grand Admiral Rastaban asked why they didn't simply conquer both our species? Vex asked. Plex shook her head, she said. Because that's not how you build a neighborhood. Vex laughed, a sound that had become less sarcastic and more genuine over recent weeks. Neighborhood. As though the galaxy were some kind of suburban development. Outside, a human shuttle passed by, its ungainly design now seeming less primitive and more purposeful, efficient. Exactly what it needed to be, no more and no less. You know what scares me most about humans, Plex Vex said, his tone uncharacteristically sincere. What's that, sir? I'm starting to think they might actually be the grown-ups in this galaxy.